Welcome back, friends. Sorry about the technical issues. We're going to try this again. So let's begin with the chant, no birth, no death. And let's focus on the vibration of expanding freedom in the heart as exemplified in the chorus, I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Death, no cast have I, no birth, no death, no cast have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Mind nor intellect, nor ego feeling. Mind nor intellect, nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth, nor metals am I. Sky nor earth, nor metals am I. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. No birth, no death, no cast have I. No birth, no death, no cast have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Mind nor intellect, nor ego feeling. Mind nor intellect, nor ego feeling. Sky nor earth, nor metals am I. Sky nor earth, nor metals am I. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. No birth, no death, no cast have I. No birth, no death, no cast have I. Father, mother, have I none. Father, mother, have I none. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Intellect, nor ego feeling. Mind, nor intellect, nor ego feeling. Sky, nor earth, nor metals am I. Sky, nor earth, nor metals am I. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. Let's begin with a prayer together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, dearest friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru Deva, Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, we bow before you all O Divine Mother, come to us. Teach us to live in harmony with your universal law. Help us to discover our true nature, though hidden beneath layers of past bad habits. Help us to see ourselves, Mother, as your perfect and pure children, that we may offer ourselves to thee unreservedly. Om, peace, amen. Good evening, friends. This evening we're going to be talking about the Yamas as a tool, a superconscious tool for troubled times. Because the Yamas are really a timeless teaching that offer us a roadmap to happiness. That if you're unfamiliar, the Yamas are a set of 5 prescriptive rules laid down by the ancient yoga seer Patanjali. Excuse me, I'm going to just take a sip of water. And Patanjali outlined these Yamas for us, and also their twins, the Niyamas, which together sort of form the 10 commandments of yoga, if you will, reminiscent to the 10 commandments of Bible, though not directly related. They certainly share some similarities. But the Yamas and the Niyamas mean like the controls and the things, the attitudes that we ought to encourage to develop spiritually. And Yama means control. Yama actually means death. And so the practice of the Yamas means to become king of death, to become able to control our vital energy, our vital life force, and keep it from being spilled outward into the infertile fields of delusion and into the world where we will lose ourselves rather than gain ourselves. And so, in essence, the Yamas are phrased as negative actions like non-violence or non-lying. And the reason why they're phrased this way is because in essence the soul is perfect, the soul is pure, the soul would never lie, the soul is always perfectly content in itself. And so what Patanjali is saying by phrasing them in this way is saying if you resist or if you redirect the bad habit of acting poorly, you will naturally discover that you are happy, that you are content in yourself, that you are at peace. And so now that we're in these interesting times, if nothing else, these Yamas are ever more applicable to our current lives because our happiness, to whatever degree it was founded on material satisfaction, is likely being shaken, isn't it? And so now more than ever, perhaps in our life, we're being forced to discover happiness, to discover a sense of peace, to discover a sense of rootedness in higher principles rather than in outward circumstances. Nayaswami Jyotish wrote beautifully a few, maybe it's months ago now, time flies when you're having fun, but he wrote that this situation we find ourselves in is perhaps one of the greatest spiritual opportunities that we'll ever have in our entire lifetime. And if you're like me, there's a lot left to go, and so that's quite a statement. And I suppose even if you're at the other end, and you are nearing the twilight of your lifetime, perhaps on earth under normal circumstances, then still it's quite a statement to say that this is still one of the golden opportunities of your entire life. So let's really try and meet that opportunity with high energy, with alert awareness, with interest, and with curiosity to how we can learn to live more completely in the self, in ourself, and less defined by outward circumstances. Because outward circumstances right now are fairly turbulent, but the inner reality is ever calm, is ever peaceful, is ever joyful. And the Yamas teach us how to reclaim our consciousness, how to become masters of ourself again, and to no longer be defined by those outward set of circumstances, to no longer lose ourselves in such a way. So the Yamas, another analogy that I heard once that gives some inspiration, because if we only think of the negative connotation, this can feel just like an endless wrist slapping, like don't do this or you'll suffer, don't do that. And that's not very much fun. But a wonderful analogy I heard once about the yamas is, a teacher once said, imagine that you are like a pail. And this is a very apt analogy. And imagine that milk is being poured into that pail constantly. Now, why wouldn't the pail be full? In fact, why wouldn't that pail be overflowing with the milk of divine contentment? What if there were holes that had been knocked in that wooden pail, or cut, or burned, or shattered? Then no matter how much milk you poured in, if there was an egregious enough hole, it would constantly be spilling out, just constantly wasting itself away. And you'd be constantly looking into the pail, wondering when it would be full enough for you to drink from it, but it would ever be empty. And that's our lives, that's our hearts, when we live out of tune with natural law, with universal principles for truth. We basically are like that prodigal son in the story of the Bible, that we waste away our divine inheritance of energy, of joy, of creativity, of bliss, of inner peace. We're constantly wasting that energy in materialism. And this isn't an original sin story. This is a current, real life, in the moment reality, because Yogananda said we are constantly in the flow of divine grace. That energy is constantly entering the body from the medulla oblongata and descending through the nervous system to animate the entire body. And he said that if that source were ever cut off, even for an instant, you would fall like a rag doll whose strings had been cut. Boom, lifeless. Because that force which gives you life would have been removed. And so that divine vivifying power is what gives us the ability even to enjoy life, let alone to waste that enjoyment frivolously. And so we are that bucket, and the divine is constantly pouring the milk, the shoma of bliss into our nervous system, endless energy, but we waste it away until when we are knocked with so many holes that we don't even realize that we are children of the divine. We don't even realize that within us is a reservoir of unlimited energy or unlimited peace. I will share just a brief example of this before diving into the yamas more specifically. But there was a period of time, I can't believe it was almost 3 years ago now, that I energized. In fact, I concluded this practice 3 years ago. I energized 6 times a day. And that was a wonderful practice, and it was a great example of tapasya, which is one of the niyamas. But what's interesting is the tapasya and brahmacharya, non-sensuality, are sort of like two sides, two facets of the same gem, two sides of the same coin. That if you practice tapasya with great concentration, you will naturally discover elements of brahmacharya, which is very, very convenient for a 21-year-old male, because if you told me, hey, practice brahmacharya, non-sensuality, it was like, yeah, I'll do my best, but that's a tall order. But I could practice tapasya. I knew how to direct energy, I knew how to focus energy, and that's essentially what tapasya is, and we'll come to that next week. But I practiced these energization exercises, which are a series of exercises designed to consciously draw energy into the body, divine energy into the body. And I practiced that way for an entire year, but there was one particular moment that was very eye-opening for me. And as I was practicing these exercises, after a few months, there was a week-long window of grace that came to me, that my practice and my consciousness were lifted into a higher level of awareness than I had ever perceived before, and I'm sort of still reaching for now. It was a grace from God. But during that week, I found myself feeling that I was no longer wasting my energy outwards through my senses. I could feel the cosmic energy entering my medulla without needing to attend to it, because I was relaxed, I was open, I had magnetized my spine. And I could feel the cosmic energy, tingling awareness, entering my body and flowing through my nervous system. And like a current in the ocean, I could feel it washing through my body and circulating in my spine. And what was incredible, there was one moment in that when I could feel that energy flowing through me so palpably, it became so enjoyable that I was no longer interested in the fruits of sense enjoyment. I remember literally being at a restaurant with friends, and I was putting a fork full of food in my mouth, and I didn't even bother to taste the food because my consciousness was so much more interested in enjoying the current of energy, that current of bliss in a very baby form in my body. Energy is like the precursor to all the 8 aspects of God. And I was just enjoying my inner nature. I was enjoying that experience of God's energy flowing through me. And in that experience, the senses became uninteresting to me. And that was a taste of what the yamas can be like on all levels. That was an experience of non-sensuality, which Lakshmi will touch in on in a little bit. But that's really what the yamas have to offer us. They offer to us the potential to reclaim our latent, true nature and to realize ourselves as being kings of ourselves, rather than slaves to material desires, rather than slaves to the senses. If you've ever felt compelled against your will into doing something that you wish you hadn't, that's the enemy of mankind. Arjuna says in the Bhagavad Gita, what is it in man that compels us to evil when we wish we wouldn't do it? And Krishna responds, desire it is. Desire draws men into wrong action, even when they wish it weren't the case. And so the yamas are taking the reins again on the horses of your senses and claiming yourself as your own dynamically. And with that comes self-mastery, and with that comes joy, with that comes peace. So now let's take a look at the first 3 yamas. I'll take us through, and then Lakshmi will finish us with the final 2. So the first yama, very famously, is non-violence, or ahimsa. And this is a classic practice that was, of course, made famous by Gandhi's movement in India to gain independence. But ahimsa basically is just about realizing that whenever we act violently towards any other life, we are affirming our separateness. And because the only way you could act violently is if you believed you were separate and superior, and therefore you were justified in your violence. And this is a very dangerous act for us to undertake for our own sake, because the more we do that, the more we slip away from our true understanding that we are a part of all that is. Like that chant says, I am He, blessed Spirit, I am He. But when we act violently, that's the exact opposite affirmation to our truth, I am He. When we act violently, we're affirming, I am this body. I am separate from the object of my violence. I am superior to the object of my violence. And therefore, I'm going to manipulate the world and destroy this thing to try and protect myself. And so we're disconnecting our heart from that universal flow which animates all life. And so, in fact, when we act violently, all we're truly doing is cutting ourselves off from that current of energy, and we ourselves die a little bit inside, because we're disconnecting ourselves from the true source of all life. But we could talk about non-violence and the practice of ahimsa in many, many ways. But one thing, the string I'd like to pick up our conversation with tonight is to look at these practices as gradients of consciousness, because chances are, if you're listening to this, you don't kick your dog, or you don't, physically abuse other life, which is wonderful. That's like the first step, and that's great. But we also need to learn how to be more subtle in our application of this, because until we're perfected, there's always room to grow. And that's good news, because that means there's always room to be happier. And just as a point of reference, Yogananda said that to perfect any of these yamas required that you be in perfect samadhi, union with God, because only God is perfect. And so we can never master any of these in an outward way in the world, but we can master our attitude of it. And so with non-violence, the first gradation of consciousness is to simply resist the desire to lie. Or excuse me, that's non-violence. Excuse me. I made some notes and they're throwing me off because I wrote them down wrong. Non-violence, the first gradation is, of course, not to hurt other people, not to act violently to try and change reality to some version of it that you prefer. But just let's begin to become aware of when that isn't, sorry, give me just one moment. It's outward, obvious expressions are easily identified, but some of the more refined expressions of violence really take some introspection, take some self-honesty to even observe. For example, Swami Kriyananda makes the perfect example. He says that whenever you criticize somebody else, that you're killing their enthusiasm, perhaps. And in a very real sense, that means you're killing the inner life force within them. Or that he said, when you compare yourself to others and you try to make yourself appear taller by cutting off the heads of others to make yourself appear taller, you're doing a violence to them. And by so doing, you're separating yourself from all life. So when we try to practice nonviolence, let's try not just to not be physically violent, because physical violence leads us to thinking only with our senses, only with our body. It dulls the mind and takes away our ability for higher solutions. But then let's also apply it in our words. Let's try and only speak kindness. Let's try never to destroy anything, but let's always try to build kindness. Let's try to build beauty. And then let's also flip this mirror in onto ourselves. Perhaps you've found yourself self-flagellating for your weaknesses or for your faults, or wishing you were better. And wishing you were better is fine. Beating yourself up for not being better is actually an act of violence, because it affirms the fault rather than affirming victory and truth. So let's practice during this period trying non-violence not only to others but also to ourselves, and learning to transmute any cruel desire to belittle, to make less, to destroy, into an act of universal compassion. Because that's really the higher gradient to non-violence, is that we learn through the expansion of compassion in our own hearts that we are a part of everything. And therefore, we should help everything to grow. That when somebody else succeeds, it's our success. When someone else triumphs, it's our triumph. And so Patanjali says that the highest fruit of nonviolence is actually universal benevolence, that we become kind and loving to all. So perhaps we could think about nonviolence as practicing not being violent, but we could also think of it as a direction of constantly moving towards universal compassion. And so throughout this time, you could simply try to open your heart to the realities of others and try to help them in some way. That would be a beautiful way to move yourself along the gradation away from tamasic violence and towards sattvic universal compassion and harmony. And you can also do this in your own consciousness, in yourself, by even if there is something within you that you wish were not there, that you wish could be destroyed, that if you fight yourself over it, perhaps you'll actually generate more resistance within yourself than is necessary. But if you offer it with kindness, with compassion up to the light to be transformed, then God can help overcome all those limitations within you. There is a beautiful story of Yogananda who demonstrates the siddhi related to nonviolence. Because Patanjali says, and I love these, he says that every yama and niyama have a correlated siddhi, which means like power, yogic power, and that you know you have developed to perfection the practice of nonviolence when, and he says, wild animals and even the most violent of criminals will become tame in your presence. Because your love is so powerful, they can't help but be drawn into that magnetism. And there's a wonderful story from Yogananda's life. There's many stories from Yogananda's life that we could tell that exemplify this miraculously. But one of my personal favorites is when he was in New York City and he was lecturing. Apparently he gave a lecture that was really condemning the elite class for being unfair and said that they would be punished karmically for some of their bad decisions. And afterwards he was walking home, and I think some people told him, you ought to be worried because you really offended some very powerful people. And Yogananda said, I have nothing to worry about. And when he was walking home, someone attacked him in an alleyway, and he felt a gun being placed in his back. And he heard some gruff voice saying, you're going to regret saying those things you said in that hall, mister. And Yogananda said he just turned around and he just gazed into the man's eyes. And I like to imagine that he gave him a taste of divine love. And he said that the man just began to shake until he dropped the pistol, and he just started weeping, and he cried out, what have you done to me? And he ran from Yogananda, because what Yogananda did to him was gave him a touch of perfect universal compassion. And in the face of that compassion, no violence can possibly endure. And so here would be a fun test for us to take, and you have to balance this with practicality, but just ask yourself, am I able to quell the anger in other people's hearts by my sweetness? Am I able to soothe the suffering even in animals by my kindness? And if not, I need to still work on this attitude of nonviolence, on this attitude of benevolence, until the magnetism in me of love is so strong that it can overcome the lesser evils, the lesser magnetisms. We have to be practical. I'm not saying you should go out and get a gun pulled on you to see if you've mastered this, but just in little things. Opportunities will always come. Perhaps when a friend calls you and they're feeling upset, or they're feeling angry, or they're feeling indignant, there's plenty of opportunity for that these days. See if by the power of your love, you can magnetize them into a higher awareness, rather than by meeting them on the violent level of their lower thoughts. Now the next yama that we come to is non-stealing. And non-stealing basically just means not desiring that which you do not have. And this is really subtle and important. And Swami Kriyananda beautifully shares with us that the underlying reason why this attitude causes us suffering is because the soul is everything. The soul already has everything. And so to desire something means that we think we don't already have it. The only reason I can desire having a car is because I think I don't have it. The only reason I can desire having a partner is because I feel that I don't have it, that I feel empty. But the reality is the soul is everything. God is everything. We possess everything. And so by coveting something, we limit our consciousness down to the size of the object of our desire. That's a terrifying thing to contemplate, that when you desire a car, or you desire a pay raise, or you desire an ice cream cone, to the degree to which your desire is all-consuming, and for that moment, you have limited the scope of your consciousness to that object, or to that experience, or to that circumstance. And that's very self-limiting. And so the practice of non-stealing is really about trying to take steps back towards realizing that we already have everything because we are everything. And one wonderful sort of thing to remember is, as Yogananda put, whatever comes of itself, let it come. This is the true test of our attitude of non-stealing, is that whatever is ours by right will come to us without us needing to go claw for it. But now let's bring it back down to a little bit more practical level. Of course, the first step for non-stealing is just don't take what isn't yours. Don't take what you haven't earned. And that has many, many ramifications. Don't take money that you haven't earned. Don't take praise that you haven't earned. Don't take experiences that you haven't earned. But then, on a deeper level, what is it to covet things that aren't yours, or that you could never have, or that aren't within your scope of your life? Not to say not to be ambitious, but What is it, the opposite, which can often reveal these things, the opposite to non-stealing is contentment. Just realizing I'm whole in myself. And so anytime we're chasing something to give us happiness in the outward world, we're really trying to steal it out of existence and bring it into our limited little hoard of self-identity. But as Swami Kriyananda put it beautifully, he says that if you're playing cards, there's only 4 aces in the entire deck. And so it doesn't matter if you're holding all 4 aces, or if someone else is, or if they're shuffled randomly amidst the deck, there's still only 4 in the entire deck. And so merely the fact that you have them or not doesn't increase the total amount of aces. And so by attempting to hoard them, we're again limiting our consciousness to our little identified ego, but we're also cutting ourselves off from the reality that there is infinite potential in everything, and that God can supply every need. And actually, this is the siddhi that is associated with the perfection of non-stealing, is that we develop the magnetism for every need to be met. Apparently, the actual translation that Patanjali gives is something along the lines of all jewels will come to you, which I thought was really beautiful, because it's all jewels of material wealth, but also all the jewels of understanding, all the jewels of bright experiences, because you're no longer craving them. So all the things that are meant to come to you, all the experiences of the universe will naturally come in their due time. And so for us right now, let's try to practice non-stealing by not reaching out for an experience that's not available to us. Like, for example, breaking our quarantine or something like that. Let's try to live contentedly in the bliss that we have everything already, if only we could find it in our own hearts, and see if we can't find that a little more clearly. The last one that I'll have time to talk about is non-lying, which is really actually one of my favorites. And I'm sort of wishing now I had began with it, but c'est la vie. But non-lying, of course, on the obvious level, just means don't tell lies. Don't manipulate reality to try and suit your selfish ends. And there are lots of reasons people tell lies. We tell lies to protect ourselves. We tell lies to try and gain power over others. We tell lies because we're ashamed. We tell lies to manipulate and to try and get our way, to make ourselves appear larger. We tell lies because we're embarrassed or whatever it may be. But non-lying is really just the practice of dynamic acceptance of truth. Because the more we lie, the more we hold reality separate from our little attempted quasi-reality, the more we suffer, because we're out of tune with what's actually real. And so it's like that story of the emperor's new clothes, that it doesn't matter how great of a lie you invent or how many people you can make believe it. At the end of the day, it's still a lie, and you're still walking naked through the streets, if you're the emperor. And only the little boy who was innocent was able to cry out, "Why, he's not wearing any clothes!" But so for us, let's try and take non-lying as an act of deep awareness of truth, of trying to accept ourselves as we truly are, trying to accept others as they truly are, trying to accept reality as it truly is, because only then can we actually work with ourselves, change ourselves, and become happier. And that if we lie to ourselves by saying, I'm a yogi, therefore I shouldn't have a desire for ice cream cones, and I should desire to meditate 3 hours a day, therefore I do, you're going to run into a lot of trouble if that's not actually true, because there's going to be a lot of repression, there'll be a lot of resistance, and eventually there's going to be a great explosion. And that's not going to be a lot of fun. But if we can practice true acceptance of ourselves first, primarily, we'll naturally learn to accept others. And we'll naturally learn to accept life as being what it is. And when we do that, there comes a great sense of peace, because no longer are we at war with reality. The more we have the tendency in our consciousness to lie, and I don't mean that like in petty lies, but to fabricate our own version of reality, the more we're constantly at war in our lives. Because we're constantly being met by the face of truth, and we're trying to cover it with the papier-mâché of our own reality. This is why we justify things. This is why we try and reason our morality into, certain justifications for our behaviors. If you have to justify yourself, chances are maybe you shouldn't have done it. Because truth should stand on its own 2 feet. And so as we live our lives, especially at this time, let's try to accept dynamically with courage what is. And the beautiful thread of truth will naturally lead us to the question of what is reality? What is my reality? And the answer to those questions is that chant again. I am He. I am He. Everything is God. And that naturally awakens love in the heart. And then we've gone from peace to bliss. And that's the beautiful transition that we go through as we go from lying and resistance of reality into acceptance and embracing truth. But one thing that I will encourage us most of all with this non-lying practice is listen very closely to your words and try to only speak that which you know to be true in its deepest sense. And if you ever find your words being out of integrity with your perceived truth, stop yourself. I mean, it's very simple, but just stop yourself and correct yourself. I have often in the past found that when I speak, I might not be completely accurate to the truth. And I don't have time to get into all of this in too much detail, but you'll know it when it happens. And when it happens, be it that you're talking to yourself or be it that you're talking to a friend, I encourage you, stop and correct yourself and say, no, that actually wasn't quite true. And here's the amazing thing. Nobody cares. For some time, I felt embarrassed to do that, to actually stop and correct myself, until I realized nobody else cared. Nobody else noticed. No, it never bothers other people. In fact, they'll learn to respect you more because they will learn that your integrity is so high that you're willing to interrupt yourself to make sure that you express something truthfully. So, and the reason why I share this as perhaps an applicable technique in this time or in all time is because the yogic siddhi for non-lying is that your very thoughts become binding upon the universe, that your words are so in tune with truth, your consciousness is so in tune with truth that if you speak it, it must be so. And there's an incredible story to illustrate this in the autobiography of a yogi when one of Yogananda's friends is on his deathbed, is dying. And Yogananda speeds to his guru, Sri Yukteswar, and begs Sri Yukteswar to intercede on behalf of his friend. And I'm forgetting some of the details, forgive me, but I think in the end of it, Sri Yukteswar says, go back to your friend, you don't need to worry. It would be easier for the sun and the moon to exchange places than for your friend to die. And so Yogananda goes and feels a little bit more relaxed, and he goes back to visit his friend, and when he arrives, he discovers his friend has in fact died. And so bereft, he runs back to Sri Yukteswar, if I'm remembering the story correctly. I might be mixing two stories together. And he says, what happened? My friend died. And Sri Yukteswar said, did I not speak? Go back, look again. Don't you have faith in your guru, basically? And so Yogananda goes back a second time and discovers that his friend has been resurrected and says that Sri Yukteswar raised him from the dead. And they go back and they meet Sri Yukteswar, and Sri Yukteswar just says, I see that the Divine Beloved found it more convenient to resurrect your friend than to exchange the sun and the moon in their positions in the sky. Because his word was binding upon the universe. And so the degree to which our word is not binding on the universe, or let alone ourselves, is the degree to which we're not practicing truthfulness. So speak the truth, think the truth, act the truth, live within your integrity, and we will surely take one step after another to finding greater happiness, even amidst our troubled times. Thank you. So now I'll invite Lakshmi up to finish this up with non-sensuality and non-greed.
Thank you, Keshava. Such a lovely and beautiful introduction to what the yamas are and the true essence of the yamas and why we practice them, which, as he stated, is really about coming back into that understanding and that knowing and the practice and the experience of who we truly are. There's so many things in the world that keep us blocked from that identity, that are drawing us out into the world. And when we can slow down and begin to refine our consciousness, the yamas and the niyamas, which we'll explore next week, naturally begin to fold into our lives, and we practice them almost spontaneously, because they are an expression of our truest selves. The next yama that we're going to explore, which Keshava has already discussed a little bit and mentioned tonight, is Brahmacarya, or non-sensuality. Non-sensuality is sometimes a difficult yama to talk about, because the first thought that people latch onto when they hear non-sensuality comes back to abstinence, refraining from sexual activity. And it is true that in the practice of Brahmacharya, non-sensuality, abstinence is an extreme and a refined form of practicing this yama. But the truth is that the term Brahmacharya, in its essence, means control. And so what we're talking about when we're practicing non-sensuality is control of the sensory output in the world. What does that mean? That doesn't mean completely shutting down, abstaining, and repressing our sensory relationship with the world. The truth is that we live in a sense-based world. We live in this material world. We experience the world through our senses, and it is the rare yogi who's able to completely withdraw and cut themselves off from that sensory-based relationship. And as Keshava just described to us, the practice of the yamas and the niyamas is a flow that's bringing us back to our true selves, but it's not a repression. Swami Kriyananda uses the example of stagnant water. And if water rests in a stagnant pool, it loses its life. It doesn't stay strong and pure. But if the water is flowing, if it's allowed to flow and the channels are open, then the water can stay pristine and clear. And this is really what we're working with. It's energy. The yamas and the niyamas are an expression of energy. And so when we talk about Brahmacharya, what we're talking about is control of energy. Not repression, not abstinence, it's control. So we ask ourselves, where can I stand in the midst of that control? Patanjali, who was mentioned earlier today, who introduced us to the yamas and niyamas, he also begins with his first yoga sutra, Yoga's Chitta Vritti Nirod. Yoga is the neutralization of the vortices of feeling, those expressions that draw us out into the world. And with non-sensuality, that's what we're talking about, those things that draw us out into the world to enjoy in a sense-based, pleasurable manner. So this means the food that we're eating. This means the music that we're listening to, the clothing that we're wearing, all of these sense-based realities that we live in. And the more that we engage in the pleasure of enjoying those sense-based activities, the more we get drawn out into them. And again, as I mentioned, it's not about abstaining completely. We can't abstain completely from a sense-based reality because it's how we engage with the world. So the key term here is control. What does it look like to come back to a place of controlling controlling our engagement with those sense-based realities? I think of it as, imagine that you are setting off on running a marathon, and your entire life you've been a short-distance sprinter, and that's what you know. And you head out and you're embarking on this 26-mile run, and you start out at the pace that you normally do as a distance or a short-distance sprinter. What's going to happen? Pretty quickly into that race, you're going to be exhausted, fatigued, your energy drained. You're not going to have the stamina to continue. This is what happens when we're not practicing Brahmacharya in a way that's allowing us to retain our energy and focus on that control within the body. An example of this, I have a little niece. She's 1.5 years old, and she loves the song Itsy Bitsy Spider. And so whenever I FaceTime with her, which is usually now just about once a week, it's immediate. The moment that she sees my face on the screen, she signs, and so she just starts doing this. And we sing Itsy Bitsy Spider, and we sing it once, and she wants it again, and we sing it twice, and she wants it again. And sometimes I'll spend 10 minutes with her singing Itsy Bitsy Spider. And what I noticed today, I just talked to her today and the same thing happened. She was eating her dinner. So it was the perfect example of not practicing Brahmacharya in any sense. Now she's 1.5, so we would never scold her for that, but in the middle of her meal, and she's eating her pasta with her hands, with her face covered in tomato sauce. My sister turns the screen to me. Her eyes burst open like this, and in the middle of her bite, she drops her noodle and starts signing Itsy Bitsy Spider. And it was just that perfect example of a lack of control. That everything she wanted, everything that was her sense-based pleasure was just right there immediately. Here's my source, give it to me. The floodgates are open. And as I said, she's adorable and she's 1.5 years old, and I will sing Itsy Bitsy Spider with her until I'm blue in the face. But it's that practice of what does that look like for each one of us to acknowledge where can I practice control? And it's a fine line, especially with Brahmacharya, between repression and control. It's not about, and Keshava earlier was talking about the sister niyama to Brahmacharya being to non-sensuality, being tapasya. And this is where we have that fine line between what is tapasya, what is repression, and what is practicing non-sensuality. So I can look at, for example, a meal that I'm eating, and I have a choice. I can eat ice cream for dinner, I can eat broccoli for dinner, I can eat a well-balanced meal of lentils and rice for dinner. The question is not to say, I have to practice non-sensuality, therefore I'm not allowed to enjoy the food that I eat. It's not about disengaging from the world, but it's about, as I said before, yogas chitta vritti nirod, the neutralization of the vortices of feeling. Control means that you have the opportunity to neutralize your likes and your dislikes, that you can eat the food that is good for you, not necessarily because it's the most delicious food. If we ate ice cream every night for dinner, what would happen to our body? It would start to decay from the inside out. We're not feeding our organs what they need to be healthy and vital. And so what we're practicing with non-sensuality in every form, in the foods that we're eating, in the music that we're listening to, in any sense-based pleasure, what we're practicing is that question of how much am I willing to control? How much of this can I offer back into the divine? Because as we're withdrawing that need to be thrilled and drawn out into the world, as we're beginning to withdraw that, then our consciousness is able to receive the spiritual blessings, the spiritual grace that Divine Mother is always offering to us. If I enter into the world like my little niece and demand what I want when I want it, the second it's there, then I'm always engaging with my happiness out in the world. And as we can begin to control that, to ask ourselves, where am I able to offer back some of my needs and some of my likes and dislikes? Where am I able to offer that back up into the divine? Then I'm working to refine my consciousness and open my heart and be more receptive to the spiritual blessings that can come to us. The power of practicing Brahmacharya is vigor and mental clarity. So as we're practicing this, as we're able to refine and to control this aspect of sense-based relationships, what we find is that we become clearer in the way that we're engaging with the world. We're more receptive to creativity. We're more receptive to inspirations that are flowing around us because, again, we're not grounded and tethered and weighed down to the material world. We're able to exist in a subtle place that influences divine creativity and inspiration. One more story that I'll share as an example of Brahmacharya. This happened many years ago. I was at Whole Foods one evening, Whole Foods Market, and I was just, finding something for dinner. And I was walking through the bakery, and Whole Foods has this whole case display of individually cut pieces of cake. And so I was just walking through, grabbing what I needed for dinner, and there I was walking past the cake section, and they looked so delicious, and it had probably been a hard day, and I probably thought, I deserve a piece of cake, the stories that we like to tell ourselves. And somehow in the midst of that, I decided, maybe you should just have cake for dinner, because do you really want or need all of these other things? What you want is the cake. Just give yourself the cake. And having this whole discussion with myself, all the time knowing that the cake is probably not what I should be eating, and certainly not what I should be having for dinner. And suddenly, when I was still staring at the display, contemplating which piece of cake I was going to buy, a little girl and her mother walked by, and they were behind me. But I could hear them, and she said, "Mommy, can we have some cookies?" And her mom said, "Oh, sure." And she said, "Can we open them now? Can I eat one now?" And her mother said, "No." And she said, "Well, can I eat one when we get in the car?" "No, you can't have one when we get in the car." And she got a little bit more, frustrated with that. "Please, just one cookie. It's just one little cookie," and going on and on in this way. And her mother said no. And essentially what she said when her daughter asked why, she said something to the extent of, "Because we can't have cookies for dinner, we have to eat cookies after dinner," which was a little lesson. Divine Mother was tapping on my shoulder through this mother and her daughter. And the little girl goes, "Well, if I were grown up, I would just eat the cookies for dinner." And here I was thinking, yeah, right? That's exactly what I was thinking. And her mother, again, said something to the effect of, "Well, that's why I'm the grown-up, because I'm making the choices that are best for us. We have to have healthy dinner, and then we can have a treat." Needless to say, I walked away from the cake display. But it's a perfect example of what brahmacharya or non-sensuality actually means. Again, it's not about repression, but it's about control. Where can I offer back the needs and the desires that I have? I desired that piece of cake. I didn't need it. I was able to control and abstain from that. I didn't need that sense-based pleasure to feed me in that moment. And so often this is the way that we interact with Divine Mother, whatever it may be, whether it's a piece of cake or, again, the promotion that we want at our job or the partner that we want. We just sit there, "Please, Mommy, please, can't I just have this one cookie? If we were grown up, I'd be eating cookies all the time." And suddenly we begin to think, gosh, well, I must be in control of my life. I have the freedom to choose. But what we learn as we get caught in that cycle of sense-based pleasures that we think is our freedom to choose, that we're actually getting more and more bound to that cycle. And what we consider to be freedom, what appears to the ego as an act of freedom, is actually an affirmation of our bondage. True freedom is the ability to withdraw from that cycle of need, to withdraw from that cycle of saying, "I deserve this, I have to have this, let me have the thrill," again, just like my little niece, dropping her pasta right in order to say, "I demand itsy bitsy spider right now." This is what happens when we get too attached to our sense-based desires. We feel we need them right now to satisfy us, to bring us happiness, whatever it may be. But as we can learn to withdraw and experience that energy, it's that beautiful story that Keshava was telling us when he was practicing energization 6 times a day, and he was taking a bite of food. There wasn't even the energy or the need, the consciousness to taste that food, because the energy that was flowing within him was so much more thrilling. This is the power of non-sensuality. This is the power of all the yamas as we begin to practice them, because each one of them, again, as Keshava said so beautifully, is helping us to withdraw the energy so that we become more aware of our true nature, our true selves. But what Brahmacharya actually represents for us is the ability to understand and practice true freedom. True freedom is not the need to eat cake for dinner because I'm a grown-up and no one can tell me not to. True freedom is the ability to choose not to eat the cake. Doesn't mean that I am required to never eat that piece of cake for dinner, but I have the choice. I'm able to withdraw myself from that hamster wheel that's always drawing us back into the world, and I can say, I choose God, I choose to withdraw my energy, I choose to support a higher reality. And this is the power of Brahmacharya. The last yama, which attaches very closely with Brahmacharya, is non-attachment. And non-attachment as Keshava was saying, there are gradations. There are subtler and subtler levels of each of these yamas. And on the grossest level, non-attachment simply means not being attached to those material possessions and those things that we have in the world. It's a slight variation from non-stealing, which was discussed earlier. Non-stealing is about not desiring what somebody else has and taking it for ourselves. Non-attachment is understanding and acknowledging that those things that I own are not actually mine, but that they belong to God. I own nothing, I am free. Everything belongs to the divine. What Swami Kriyananda says to us in The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, when he talks about the yamas, especially when he talks about this yama, is imagine everything in your life is on loan from Divine Mother. She can take it back at any moment. And again, on the grossest level, we look at this as our houses, our cars, our material possessions. But what does it mean to withdraw that, or to explore that on a more refined level? That the people in our lives belong to Divine Mother, that the people that we love are not ours, that they may come in and out of our lives. Not simply talking about death, though that is the extreme version of it, but that partner that you love, they're not yours. You don't get to own them, you don't get to hold them. Divine Mother is loaning them to you for the lessons that you have to learn in this life. Your children. And even on deeper levels, we can experience that. Your own personality, those aspects of self, those characteristics of yourself that define who you are. If you thought right now, if you closed your eyes and someone said to you, give me the first 5 adjectives that somebody would use to describe you, those qualities are not yours. They do not define who you are. Everything you are is an expression of the divine. Everything that you are is offered back up into the divine in the true practice of non-attachment. The sister niyama of non-attachment is devotion to the Supreme Lord, right? Or what we consider to be just that experience of superconsciousness, of samadhi, that experience of being so enthralled and in love with the divine that the self ceases to exist. We dissolve back into the divine. And this is, of course, the perfection of what non-attachment looks like. I own nothing, I am free. It's now I'm forgetting the chant that Keshava started with. I am He. Yes, I am He, I am He. Blessed Spirit, I am He. And the ability to understand and to acknowledge everything in your life is on loan from the Divine Mother, that everything you are, down to the personality that you hold, down to the body that you possess, all of this is an expression and is a manifestation of what's needed to help you to grow spiritually. These are all vessels and tools that we're using along the way. Everything is about understanding and acknowledging that we are identified with the divine. There is no reality beyond that. There is no I outside of our experience of the divine. And anything we're holding on to that we consider to be a part of ourselves is simply affirming our separateness. The grosser example of this, when I was thinking about non-attachment today, I was thinking about my great Aunt Margaret. I feel like everybody has a great Aunt Margaret, whatever that means to you in your life. But I had a great Aunt Margaret, and she was a Franciscan nun. And I only met her 3 times in my life, but each time I was always drawn to the power of her vibration. And I remember one time we went to visit her at the convent, and we'd brought pictures of the family, and we shared them with her to see, and she gave them back at the end. And my parents said, oh no, you can keep them, they're yours. They're pictures for you to hold on to share. And she wouldn't accept them. And she said, no, we don't keep anything for ourselves. We offer everything back. And so she was there, and it was such a beautiful expression of this. I was very young, maybe 4 or 5. And so I didn't cognize this at the time, but as I reflected on it, and just the power of that experience, it was the perfect example of non-attachment. She was enjoying those memories with us, laughing with us, looking at the pictures, enjoying playing with us. But then when the visit was over, it's not that the love was withdrawn. The love was still there. The familial togetherness and connection was still there. But the need for anything material, it didn't exist. It would simply cloud the thin veil of that experience. That's not the ethereal not finding the right word, having the material possessions, it would somehow demean the experience of love that was within her consciousness. That having the material possessions of that, it wasn't necessary for her to hold on to the experience of love that she was feeling. And it's such a powerful example of what non-attachment looks like. And of course, the second example of practicing non-attachment, this is a difficult thing for us to do in our lives. It's a difficult thing for us to think about doing right now when it feels like so much has been taken away from us, and that can make us a little bit angry and upset. And one of the activities that Swami Kriyananda recommends for people to do every night before they go to bed is to create a mental bonfire and to throw all of your possessions into that mental bonfire. And I do this very often. It's actually one of my favorite ways to fall asleep. I just think about everything going in, all the things that I love, one thing after another being poured in. And it wasn't until about maybe 2.5 years ago that I started then offering people into that mental bonfire, the people that I loved, that I felt attached to. And very recently, as I was sharing with you guys today, the levels of refinement in this, I started just offering those personality traits and those qualities that I feel define me into that bonfire until I can get to that place of really offering everything that I am into that divine bonfire of non-attachment, of knowing nothing is mine. I don't own any of this. I own nothing. I am free. In myself, I am free. Or as Keshava was singing for us earlier today, I am he, mind nor intellect nor ego feeling, no birth, no caste, no death have I. There is nothing in this material human experience that we are going to hold on to when we leave this world. Therefore, there's nothing that we need to be attached to in this moment. And that, of course, is the perfection of non-attachment, is the ability to really live in that knowing that you are one with the divine. So as we close out our evening, I'll use the image that Keshava shared with us earlier of this wooden pail that is constantly being poured, with the milk of divine love constantly pouring into it. And again, he poses the question, why isn't this bucket or this pail overflowing with divine love? And it's because all of these little holes are draining that milk, are draining the milk of divine love. What we're practicing as we're consciously bringing our attention to the yamas and the niyamas, what we're practicing are the tools and the techniques that we can use to just begin one by one to plug these holes up. That as we practice non-violence, non-stealing, non-lying, non-sensuality, non-attachment, what we're really doing is we're affirming all of that which is our true nature. We're plugging up each of those holes so that we create a vessel within our own consciousness that is able to receive and to hold that milk of the divine, that is able to receive and to hold the consciousness of divine love. And we're not losing anything in the process. What we're doing is simply peeling back the layers of habits and karma that are keeping us from our true selves. So thank you so much for joining us this evening and for sharing the yamas with us. And we look forward to seeing you next week where we'll talk about the niyamas.